So I looked high and low trying to find out how I could get SKR Mini E3 version 1.2 board to work on my CR-10 without having to go through extreme measures. And I've changed the firmware several times. I've used Visual Studio, I think is what it's called, and changed the code and watched a bunch of YouTube videos. And you wouldn't think it'd be that complicated because the only thing you really have to change after you upload the firmware for an Ender 3 is the bed size is different. So you can see how much difference the size is, and that is about exactly how far it goes over. When I did my first video, I wasn't thinking about that, and I let this thing sit for like a week, came down here and went to print, and it will just leave a big pile of infill on the right side here because it just ejects a whole bunch where the line is, and it'll even do half circles and have a perfect line right there, but it will not go past that point. And I'm pretty sure you can't change it in Cura. Really, it should be in the firmware anyway. You would think all you'd have to do is get on Pronterface, which I hadn't used until yesterday, and just go in there and change the end settings. Unlike a CNC machine, this does not have, well, if you know this, if you have a 3D printer, it doesn't have a limit switch on both ends of the travel. It only has it on the home side. So I watched a bunch of videos. I even went through and changed all the stuff on plain Marlin firmware, and that still didn't do it. So today I'm going to show you how you can get your Ender 3 board to easily change over to the settings for a CR-10. Today on Hobbies and Hot Rods. For everybody that's going to say, why can't you just change it in Cura? Can't you just change the max limit? Well, an easy way to tell is if you plug your board in to your laptop or whatever on Pronterface, and you can manually control X, Y, and Z on here, it's easy to tell how far it's going to go over by just traveling manually all the way over an X and Y. You'll know if it's going to go as far as it should go or not. That's the easiest way to tell. Now, I found it very useful to use Pronterface to see what kind of settings, or at least feed rates, were on the old board before I ran the new board, and I put them both on Pronterface. This is the wire that comes with your new Bigtreetech SKR. You don't have to have this powered up for it to work or to load the settings in a Pronterface. And all you got to do is connect. So we're plugged into our board. Disconnect first. Oh, so we're plugged into our board here. Connect. And I'll point out right here it says CR-10. CR-10 right there. And we'll type in M503, enter. And here's all those settings I was talking about. And this is a good reference because you can see here the max feed rate is, it says M203, which is the code for feed rates, is 500 by 500, and 5 on Z, and E is 25. When I uploaded the firmware to my new board, it was 2500. So you can imagine how freaked out I was when it came down real slow and went to take off on the table and went full feed rate to the back and crashed. So just FYI on that one. And I'm only showing you that you can plug these in for reference. I mean, yeah, you can manually control it with Pronterface, but it's, like I said, a fail-safe. You want to double-check your old board to see what the settings are on it when you plug in your new board and see what the settings are in it. Simply M503. You can see the M codes on there to know how fast it's going to go. It will not tell you how far it's going to go. You're going to have to manually travel that way. How we're going to change the board, we'll get to that now. Okay, so I'm going to start from scratch on this and show you how I did this. The biggest thing is trying to get a configuration for a CR-10. You can find almost every different kind of configuration for an Ender 3, being it's the 350 Chevy of printers, or the 5.3 Chevy if you're a younger guy. We'll just get right to it here. So first off, you need your Marlin firmware. So we'll open up our browser. Firmware.org, marlinfw.org. This way you know you get the most up-to-date basic firmware from Marlin. Nobody's messed with this. Go to download. And we'll download the zip of the latest release here, 2.0.7.2. And I've already downloaded the zip. And here is the zip folder. I already extracted it and I renamed it Marlin 2.0.7. I'm pretty sure the name for the subfolder has to be the same as the main folder, so make sure you name it the same. We need our config file now, so we'll go to GitHub Marlin firmware. And we don't need anything on here except the config files. So you can see it's already Marlin 2.0.7.2. And this is an archive file. There's all kinds of different configurations in here. So we'll download this. And once again, I've already downloaded this. And here's our configurations release. It comes in a zip file, and this is it extracted. So you go in here to start over again. Configurations release, and config, and examples. And this is all the brands of 3D printers. Just for reference, I got most of the information from a video from Chris Riley on Chris's Basement on YouTube. It's in my favorites playlist on my YouTube channel if you want to check that out. I think this is a simpler way than the way he showed. But once again, I could not find anything from somebody who was doing this on a CR-10. Everybody's doing it on an Ender 3. Once again, the Ender 3 is the most popular. For instance, I did the same thing he was showing, but we'll go to Creality on here. And CR-10 has two configuration files, one for a plain Jane Creality and one for a Bigtreetech SKR Mini E3 2.0. The one I'm doing it for is an E3 1.2. And I don't think the firmware is the same. I don't know if it'll work or not. I tried doing this with a Creality version 1 config files, and it doesn't work. So, I mean, it'll work, but it's not working right. So, given this is config for a regular Creality board, keep that in mind. So what I did is, all you need to do is go to Ender 3, because this board is made for an Ender 3, or at least it's advertised that way. So go to Ender 3, and they do have config files for a Bigtreetech SKR Mini E3 version 1.2, and that's what we have. So we'll just go in here, copy these config files, and then we'll go back to our Marlin folder, go into the config file, oops, wrong one, go into the Marlin file, and you can see there's config files in here already. So we'll just hit paste and replace the files in destination. So now we have our config files from an Ender 3 SKR E3 version 1.2 in plain Jane Marlin. So we can close this out, and this is where Visual Studio comes in to play. If you don't have Visual Studio Code, it's very easy to download. You just Google Visual Studio Code, download that, and then once you get that downloaded, you can Google Platform.io and download that, and it's an add-on. Also very simple. If you look up Platform IO, it'll tell you how to download it if I'm not being clear enough. So you get those two on here, and go to Add Folder to Workspace. We'll go to our downloads, Marlin 2.0.7, and you don't want to just select the main folder, you want the subfolder. So whatever's one above the one we put the config files in, right here, here's our config files. Well, it's not going to show up on here anyway. It would normally be under Marlin, but I'll start over again. So you get your Marlin, and you want the subfolder. So we'll add our subfolder. The best thing about this Visual Studio Code is you can go in here and change whatever you want. Yesterday I had two of them open, one on each screen, and that way you can compare, for instance, the regular Creality config files to the config files of the SKR board or the regular Ender 3 board, just like you can the settings for the M codes on your Pronterface. So keep that in mind. It's a very good tool to have. It's a little intimidating at first, but like I said, everybody goes to this and they go through the scenario of doing it for an Ender 3, and that does not work for an Ender 3, simply because the bed size is the different size. So we'll open up Marlin 2.07 here, and the two files that you're going to want to mess with are going to be under Marlin and your configuration adv.h and configuration h. So we'll open up our configuration h. This is not the fastest computer. If I ever get monetized, I'll buy better stuff. So if this comes in useful to you, please like, subscribe. Alright, so you come down through here and you can see it's already set up. Somebody's done all the work already for us, where you don't have to go in and change every line by line. Saves a bunch of time. A lot of people will show you what lines to change. This is the motherboard we're using right here. And if you want your name to show up different, like right now, if you load this firmware in and the Marlin starts up, it'll say Ender 3. So we'll change that to, you can make this whatever you want, but we'll say SKR Mini E3 version 1.2. Scroll down here. Now if you lose where I'm going, like if you have two screens like I had yesterday, and yesterday I was watching a video and doing it on the right screen, you can always go along with the numbers of lines on the left here. So also, if you want to find something specific, you can hit Control F, and I know specifically the table size that it will have in here is 235 because I've already changed it. So we'll type in 235. And next one right here, bed size. So if you haven't used Control F or anything in Windows, it says there's 3 235s in this program. And we need the second one. So we'll close out of that. So here's your defined bed size. And I have a picture from the Creality's website just for a good reference in case I forgot. 300 by 300 by 400. So we can just change this to space 300, 300, and then our Z max position will be 400. And that's it. I didn't change anything else besides the title. we can close this and we'll go to our platform IO, and this has to be built with the right environment. I'm not a code writer. I don't know the specifics of why anything is the way it is. This is just the way it works. So we're looking for STM32F103RC underscore Bigtreetech 512K. Now this is going to be baud rate of 115. It does not matter. It's 512K on here. I haven't tried it with USB or just the regular one. I just know that it works with the 512K. So we'll hit the down arrow on this one. See the rest of the tree, if you will. And it'll take a moment to load up. And we also want to see our terminal, which is not on right now. So there's our terminal. All right. So now we've got our build right here, and this is what we'll hit. Click on build, and this will just go through and put everything together and actually tells you if it's right or wrong, which is pretty awesome. Alright, well, that took a while, but it succeeded. I noticed it does say 50 problems. I don't know what that's all about. The one I loaded yesterday worked fine. So we've tested our build. It's built, I guess you could say. We'll go back up here to Explore. And go to the PIO build, and this is what our environment was. Hit the down arrow on that, and then go down here to firmware.bin and right click, reveal in File Explorer, and there's our firmware. So we right click this, copy, and then we'll just put it in. I don't have an SD card in right now. Then we'll just put it in our firmware, or put it in our SD card. Now you have to upload the firmware from. Oh, open that twice. You have to open the firmware. I'm sorry. You have to upload the firmware on the main board with a little tiny SD card. You cannot load it in from the touchscreen. The last video I did, I may have said it was a firmware upgrade for the motherboard, and that is not the case. I was very new to this at the time, and it was only upgrading the firmware on the monitor. I'm pretty sure the board already comes with Marlin on it. So basically, you take this little tiny card with the firmware on it. It doesn't matter if it has other files, as long as they're not firmware bin files or bin files. Put it in the motherboard and turn it on, and it'll load it, and it'll start Marlin, and it'll be the old Marlin simulation. So I hope that helps. I did notice that there's a little more noise, and I'll show you a video of that here in just a second. You can hear how noisy the motors are on this because the stepper settings aren't right or aren't as quiet as they could be. But the firmware that's on this is the firmware that I would have, well, the firmware that's on this is the same firmware that you would use for an Ender 3 with the config files from an Ender 3 setup for an SKR Mini E3 version 1.2. I did just realize the steppers on the CR-10 are just a little bigger, but I was going to get the stepper settings from the other one and see if that helps. And then you have this one, Almost no noise at all. I was going to point out that all you need for the touchscreen is the version 3 E326 bin file, and then a TFT35 bitmap and font file. You can get a whole bunch of different bitmaps. I have this on one of them, and a different one on the other. But in the first video, I showed you where to get the copy to SD card root directory. The hybrid is the red menu, and the unified, see, like here, you would get your bin file for your firmware here, and then you would get, like I have a TFT35, you would take this one, and this one has that one there. And if you're updating the firmware on your screen, it will have to go on the side right here. If you're updating the motherboard, it's going to have to go in right there. So, also, a couple of differences I noticed. When you go to print, this one only has two options, and this is the one I just showed you in the video. Even though you can only load a file to print off of on this side in this menu. Now, if you went to the Marlin menu, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, if you go to the Marlin menu, pretty sure it has to be down here. That's the only way I've gotten it to work in this way. And if you can go back to the other screen after you started printing, but it shows up funky. I mean, it shows up everything, but it won't show that the nozzle and the bed is heating up. So I just wanted to point that out. Like if you go to the firmware I have in the CR-10, you go to print on this one. Now here's the unified menu. Now it won't show up right. Well, it's probably still coming alive. Yeah. Okay, after you let it warm up for a second. But if you go to print on this one, it has onboard SD, which it will not print on this menu, the onboard SD slot. But it's just for some reason on this unified menu, it has all three of them, as to where this one would be the one you would use, or that one, and this one is the smaller SD card. So I just wanted to point that out to you. Yeah, I think that's everything. So I did do a complete print on this yesterday, and I was going to add in that if you have a gear extruder like this that has it has the extruder with a little radius cut into it, and it has two geared extruding wheels. You know, on Amazon when you buy those, it'll say change steps from 100 to 130. Well, these are at 93 default, 93 or 95, I believe. Because this is a smaller wheel, so it has to turn faster to get it to come out the same speed as the bigger one. For instance, okay, that's the difference in size right there. So half the reason I put a different board on this is because I was having a terrible time trying to figure out why I had all these spaces. And I've read everything. People are like, oh, well, you have to have the wheel tighter on your extruder because it's slipping. Well, you can tighten this thing up super tight. Made no difference. Changed my nozzles. It had a Capricorn tube on it already. I slowed down speeds, changed different heats, and it would just keep coming out the same way. And I was like, maybe it's something on my board. And being I liked the way it was so quiet on the Ender 3, I figured I might as well replace the board anyway. And that's the reason I got this dual gear, or this geared extruder, because I figured it would help a lot. Well, it still slipped on this too. So I'll tell you what I did is I ended up taking this whole thing apart, and I don't know if the Capricorn tube came up a little bit or what, but it had it wasn't all the way down in there from what I could tell. And see that? Yeah, it wasn't all the way down in there, and it had a bunch of stuff stuck to the inside of it, and it had a whole bunch of friction in it. So I pulled this out, and the goo that was in there, of course, when it's cooled off, it's going to be hard, but there is a sleeve inside of this with a counterbore that the tube goes all the way up against, and it looked like either the end of the tube had melted off or it had came up a little bit, and I ended up having to drill out the tube inside of this, the metal sleeve, and clean it all out again. I had an extra tube, stuck this one on here, and it seems to be working out okay now. So, but I was going to point out that the steps on this gear-driven extruder, these are either at 93 or 95, and what am I running for settings now? Okay, so if you take 93 plus 30, it's 123. So, like it says on Amazon in the description of this, change your steps from 100 to 130, and these are defaulted at 93, and the Ender 3 works great at that speed with a regular extruder. So, I just added 30 to 93, and that's 123, and it worked out pretty good for me yesterday. I was going to point that out. But just don't get too discouraged. Keep trying, because I tried, I don't know how many prints on this, and aside from getting my firmware lined out, this is how spacey it was, and you can see the second layer hardly even covered that. But the gaps on this side, you can see how right there's two holes that are only half moons, and that's because it was just running out of travel. And some of the other places, it was getting clogged up. So keep that in mind. This printer probably has well over 1,000 hours on it. I've done TPU, I've done ABS, PETG, a lot of PETG, and a lot of wood. I think a lot of it gets crammed up in there, and you go from filament to filament. Some of it likes to be like this stuff likes to be, this is eSun PLA Plus. It likes to be 209. That's what I got the best results out of yesterday. I use a lot of, what is this stuff that I use? I have stickers everywhere. Solutech. Solutech I found likes to be 204, 205-ish on these printers. Just a word of advice. And I've done tons of TPU on this. If you haven't upgraded to a metal extruder and drilled out the hole, go ahead and point that out too. You basically just take an 1/8 drill bit, which is 125 thousandths, and drill this out bigger, and take a piece of Bowden tube and cram it in there, and cut the ends so they're sharp between the gear and the roller, and that will fill all the gap in there for flexible filament. And I like to print things like these tires. So I just used a set of tires on my Slash, and they hold up pretty good. They're really hard. This one broke, but for the sake of trying, great mud tires. So anyway, hope this is useful. Thanks for watching. Hobbies and Hot Rods. Like and subscribe. I appreciate you guys watching. Almost to 100 subscribers now. 98 as I'm taping this video. So please subscribe. I do hope to be monetized one day. Thanks, guys. Stay safe out there.